We're almost at the end point of our Lent journey. Jesus is about to enter the holy city, Jerusalem, there to complete his ministry on earth. Right from the beginning, Jesus had called women, men and children to follow him. And right from the beginning, he had told them that to follow where he called would entail suffering, rejection and death. In our Lent reflections, we have seen how Christ calls people from their occupations, calls them from what it is that they do to follow and to enter with him into the way of the cross. Everyone who follows, we reflected, had to make an active choice, hear Christ's call to them and obey it by leaving behind all and following, or hearing Christ's call and remaining behind as Christ moves on to search out and call others. This choice, we observed, was a free choice. Each of those whom Christ encounters on the way and calls to follow him has to make up their minds whether that call was right for them. We saw how many followed, giving up what they had in order to follow Jesus. At the same time, we saw that some determined to stay behind, not risk responding to Christ's unsettling call into an unknown future. Those who did follow, followed knowing full well that Christ called them not to a life of holy introspection, but a life of acting, doing in his name. Very early on in their journeys with Jesus, those who followed his call were told that the end point of his journey and theirs would be a place of rejection and suffering, that in following they would face death. We reflected that this suffering would not be the honorable suffering that attracts the praise or the pity of this world, but a suffering that was dishonorable, even disreputable. When Jesus calls women and men, he calls them to suffer rejection with him. The theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer told the students at his underground seminary in Finkenwalde in Pomerania in unambiguous terms that their own following and discipleship would mirror Christ's. Whenever Christ calls, his call leads us to death, he explained. The cross, which is the end point of the journey of the one who calls, is also the end point of the journeys of all those who follow. The cross is not the terrible end of a happy, pious life, Bonhoeffer knows. Instead, it stands at the beginning of our community with Jesus Christ. This is true for all followers, not only those who, like Bonhoeffer and his students, follow Christ in times of great adversity. From the moment a person follows the call of Christ, they receive the cross. The cross is laid on each Christian. The first experience of suffering that those who are called experience is the cutting of their accustomed ties, we learned last week. Just as Peter, Andrew, James and John, the first to follow Christ's call, left behind their livelihood, property and families, so we all need to be ready to cut off ties, to burn our bridges. The first Christ suffering that everyone experiences is the call which summons us away from our attachments to this world, Bonhoeffer tells. That severance of relationships and letting go of habits, the hating of anything and anyone who is not Christ, is in itself a form of dying. It is the death of the old self in the encounter with Jesus Christ, Bonhoeffer observes. Those who enter into discipleship enter into Jesus' death. They turn their living into dying, such has been the case from the very beginning. Today's Gospel reading takes us another step closer on that journey of living dying. It takes us to the approach to Jerusalem, where Jesus will face yet the harshest rejection by the authorities, where he will face arrest, a short and slanderous trial, and a long and cruel death. Jesus commands his disciples to prepare for his entry to Jerusalem. They bring a colt, clothe it with their garments, and set Jesus onto it. As he is guided into the city, other people spread their cloaks onto the dusty road to make it a carpet of garments. And all his followers, all those whom he had called from their previous attachment to the world, hail him as their ruler. Here was the Christ, the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Here was the one who by his acts of power gave glimpses in this life of the true nature of the life to come. Here was the one who would embrace rejection and suffering and lay down his life so that all who hear his call would have life forever. The disciples become joyful witnesses of Christ's works and call. As Jesus enters the holy city on a carpet of garments, they publicly affirm their confession of Jesus as the Christ, the promised one. Their song of praise makes an important distinction. In heaven, Jesus will bring peace and glory. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven, they sing, while on earth he will bring division and a sword. Bonhoeffer expressed it in this way: that is the work of Christ on earth. No wonder that the world accuses him who brought the love of God to the people of hatred towards human beings. Who can claim the people's love and sacrifice so exclusively, if not the enemy of humanity or the saviour of humanity? Who will carry the sword into their homes, if not the devil or Christ, the Prince of Peace? For the authorities that will only a moment later demand that Jesus make his disciples stop their testimony, Christ is that enemy of humanity, because he calls people out of this world, freed them from the demands of this world by the sword of division that he brings. At the decisive moment, as Jesus enters his own city, the disciples' testimony is to the kingdom and the life that lasts forever. They witness about what it has been like to follow Christ, to contend daily with evil and suffering, witness about what it has been like to see Christ bring justice and peace, healing and grace to those who sought him out. And the authorities demand that their voices be stilled. "Teacher, order your disciples to stop," some Pharisees said to Jesus. But just as the daily struggle with the world is an integral part of the daily pattern of faithful discipleship, so the very fabric of the city is a living testament to the rejection of those sent there to save it. "I tell you," Jesus responds to the Pharisees, "if these were silent, the very stones would shout out." The stones of the city by which the prophets had been slain, which had been soaked in the blood of faithful messengers of God, would testify to the call of Christ to turn from the ways of this world to the peace and glory, the freedom and sanctuary of heaven. If these disciples were silent, the very stones would shout. But the disciples sing with confidence the song of Jesus' triumphal return to his own city. Because the final element of discipleship is one of active witness. Disciples are called to witness proactively to the one who gave his life so that all may have life. Christ's disciples are called to witness to the one who gives them life by being life givers to others. Bonhoeffer tells us that when we do what Christ calls us to do, we become Christ bearers to others. Those who carry Christ's word receive one last promise for their work. They have become Christ's co-workers and helpmates. They are to be like Christ in all things. Thus, for the people to whom they go, they also are to be like Christ. When we witness to Christ through our words and actions, we bring Christ to the world, carry an inestimable gift to others. Disciples are bearers of Christ's presence, Bonhoeffer tells. They bring the people the most valuable gift, Jesus Christ, and with him God the Father. And that means forgiveness, salvation, life, blessedness. That is the reward and the fruit of their work and their suffering. As disciples, we are entrusted with showing forth the precious gift of Christ's own presence to our world. And we show forth that presence through our actions. We witness to the one who carries our cross by carrying one another's burdens, by sharing and shouldering the injustices others face, as well as by advocating and fighting on their behalf. And this aspect of witnessing has implications not only for life within the community of faith, but for life within the society in which we live, particularly if that society oppresses its members. Bonhoeffer told his students at the Finkenwalde Underground Seminary. Where the world despises other members of the Christian family, Christians will love and serve them. If the world does violence to them, Christians will help them and provide them relief. Where the world subjects them to dishonor and insult, Christians will sacrifice their own honor in exchange for their disgrace. Where the world seeks gain, Christians will renounce it. Where it exploits, they will let go. Where it oppresses, they will stoop down and lift up the oppressed. Where the world denies justice, Christians will practice compassion. Where it hides behind lies, they will speak out for those who cannot speak and testify for the truth. For the sake of brothers and sisters, be they Jew or Greek, slave or free, strong or weak, of noble or of common birth, Christians will renounce all community with the world, for they serve the community of the body of Jesus Christ. Being a part of this community, Christians cannot remain hidden from the world. They have been called out of the world and follow Christ. As followers of Jesus Christ, then, we cannot remain hidden and leave the witnessing about the one who called us to the stones of Jerusalem. Nor can we leave the witnessing to the costliness of Christian discipleship to the war memorials of Flossenbürg and Buchenwald. It is true that all these places, and many more the world over, serve as silent witnesses to the personal sacrifice of those who followed in the footsteps of Christ. They testify to those who gave their lives, or of their lives, in order to carry the inestimable gift of Christ's presence into the suffering of our world. These stones will continue to shout and witness when our own voices are silenced. But if we are serious about our Christian discipleship, then we also need to make our voices heard, need to speak out for those who have no voice or whose voices are being silenced. And that means standing up to unjust structures and rulers, as well as serving and tending those who have become victims of those structures or injustices. At the time the Nazis took power in early 1933, Bonhoeffer expressed the Church's obligation in this way: when the Church witnesses that the state exercises too much or too little order and justice, it is placed in the position not only of having to bandage the wounds of the victims beneath the wheel, but to drive a spoke into the wheel itself. Then he elaborated how the Church would need to resist injustice and oppression. There are three possibilities for action that the Church can take vis-à-vis the state. First, questioning the state as to the legitimate state character of its actions, that is, making the state responsible for what it does. Second is service to the victims of the state's actions. The Church has an unconditional obligation towards the victims of any societal order, even if they do not belong to the Christian community. Let us all work for the good of all. These are both ways in which the Church, in its freedom, conducts itself in the interest of a free state. In times when the laws are changing, the Church may under no circumstances neglect either of these duties. The third possibility is not just to bind up the wounds of the victims beneath the wheel, but to throw itself into the wheel in order to stop it. This Holy Week, I encourage you to reflect on three things. Firstly, how can you be a more effective witness to Jesus Christ? Do you feel confident enough to give an account of your followership of Jesus to others? Or are there more tools you need in order to speak of why you have chosen to respond to Christ's call? If so, what are they? And how could you develop those skills? Do you need to join a small group or Bible study group to enable you to speak with greater confidence in your witness to Jesus' transforming power in your life? Secondly, how do you translate your words of witness into action? Are there things you need to be doing in bearing witness through your actions on behalf of your own community or for others? How do you work for the good of all in your daily life? How will you endeavor to overcome evil with good? Are there causes your faith makes you passionate about? And what are you doing about them? How can your positive action underpin your witness? Finally, are there areas in our society where your witnessing to Christ leads you into opposition to the authorities, leads you to protest or to resistance of injustice? What are the darknesses, the injustices of our age that you need to stand up for? How will you let your voice be heard in your advocacy, your protest, your intentional voting and campaigning? Bonhoeffer was part of a movement of resistance. Are there others who can help your voice be heard better and more effectively? Interest groups that you can join in order to make your resistance of injustice more effectual. As Jesus enters Jerusalem, in their song of praise, the disciples bear witness to how inextricably linked the realm of faith is with the affairs of our world. Heaven and earth are closely linked, they sing in their hymn, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven." In the same way in which his disciples witnessed to his deeds of liberating power, so Jesus will witness to them in the time of their trial and suffering. This is what true discipleship means. Stand by Christ in his suffering, stand by the members of the body of Christ in their suffering. The people who have heard and responded to his call, who have taken on their share of the cross in suffering and self-denial, who have confessed Jesus in this world, those are the people with whom Jesus will stand forever. Those who remain faithful to the word and the confession here will find that Jesus Christ will stand by them in the hour of judgment. He will know them and stand with them, Bonhoeffer encourages us on our own journeys of courageous following. When we live as disciples in this world, Christ will help us bear our burdens of faith-filled living and sacrificial action in this world. Bonhoeffer assures us that when we witness to Christ in this world, he will bear witness for us in the world to come. Those who have held on to Jesus in this life will find that Jesus will hold on to them in eternity.